Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this presentation. I'm going to present to you exam techniques that apply to CA1.1 financial accounting. In this presentation, I am going to discuss the competencies that you should develop before you face an examination. Next, I'll discuss the common mistakes that candidates in the examination make. And third, I'll discuss word commands or keywords that examiners use when setting question papers. And finally, I'll give you useful advice that will make you make use the time of examination and pass the examination. That will include time management skills. We start with competencies that you must develop during study time, which you'll use in the exam itself. The first one is you must master how to apply the rule of double entry. Please remember, there are two types of transactions to which double entry must be applied. The first one is the original transactions. Original transactions are those we obtain from invoices, credit notes, and debit notes. The double entry, as you apply to them, is different from the way you apply to the second type of account transactions. So account transactions, I'll give an example of them. For example, the owner of the business has taken goods from the business. You transfer an amount from purchases to the drawings account. That type of transaction is an account transfer. Another example that I will give for original transaction is when you purchase goods on credit. It means you should be able to identify that purchases account is one of the accounts, and then trade payables is a second account. So who is giving and who is receiving to apply the rule of double entry? Trade payables stands for the outside entity, so they give us. So we have to credit them, and then the purchases account stands for our entity. So we are going to debit the purchases account to show that we have received the goods from the supplier. One competence that you must develop before you face the exam is how to allocate amounts to time periods. I'll give you an example. If a payment is made for 9 months, from April to December, and you're preparing financial statements at the end of September, then the scaling down of amounts to take to the profit and loss will be 9/12, not 3/12, and not 15/12. You must calculate the time period correctly. So most students don't develop this skill of allocating amounts to time period. Another example is where the payment is for 15 months and you are preparing financial statements in December after 12 months. So if you want to calculate how many months after the 12 months, they are 3 months after the 12th month. So if you don't calculate correctly, you'll find the prepayment amount is incorrectly calculated. If you say 4/12, then that's wrong because it's supposed to be 3/12 times the amount paid. Then you have the correct prepayment. Another competence that you must develop before you come to face an exam is that of identifying the rationale or logic of what you are doing. The best example I can give you is when you are doing bank reconciliations. The first stage is preparing the updated cash book. The rationale for preparing the updated cash book is to process transactions as if they are occurring now because we didn't record them in our books. On the other hand, if you are preparing a bank reconciliation statement, the rationale is that you are reversing what you did in your books because the banks have not processed them. So each of the processes or calculations you do in accounting, you must stress what is the logic of things, what is the rationale of doing this calculation. It's important to do that before you face an exam. The next competence that you must develop before you face an exam is to master the order of formats. Because whilst you are thinking to prepare an answer, you spend that time productively to write the formats. There are students who swap entries. The order of entries are swapped because they didn't master the format. For example, if you are preparing the report, the statement of financial position, you must know that first on the line is non-current assets, then followed by current assets. You may estimate to leave about 5 lines to come and insert items falling under that heading. If you write the current assets as a heading, you leave about 8 lines because you know you are going to insert those items that fall under that subheading. Of course, on the liability side, the first one is equity, which will have 5 to 6 lines. The next one is non-current liabilities, which will have about 3 lines. And finally, current liabilities. It's important to master the formats because you don't have to list them in a reverse sequence. The order must be correct. The next competence that I'm going to mention that you must develop before you face an exam is that of using the profit markup and profit margin. Most students get mixed up on this issue. There are about 3 ways of doing it. I'll just highlight one of them. If you are given a revenue figure and then the percentage of profit is a markup, you can't apply a markup percentage straight on the revenue figure. No, you must convert it from the markup to the equivalent margin. If the percentage is 20%, meaning 20 over 100, to convert it, then it will be 20 over 120. On the other hand, if you are given a cost of sales figure and the percentage is a profit margin figure, then you need to convert the profit margin figure down to the markup equivalent. If the percentage is 20%, meaning 20 over 100, to convert it to a markup figure, you subtract the numerator from the denominator. So it will become 20 over 80. Then you can apply it on the cost of sales figure. The next competence that you must develop before you come to an exam is that of deriving credit sales from trade receivables. Especially when you're handling an incomplete records question, this competence is very useful. Please remember, a trade receivables account is an asset account. Therefore, the opening balance must start on the debit side. Most of other entries will be on the credit side. For example, sales returns will be on the credit side. The amount they paid us will be on the credit side. Transfers to payables will be on the credit side. Irrecoverable debts will also be on the credit side. Now, the common mistake is the closing balance will also be on the credit side because below total lines, it comes on the debit side. So if you put the figures in their right places, you will find the balancing figure of credit sales correctly. The next competence that you must develop is that of deriving credit purchases. You must know that credit purchases are derived from a trade payables account. Now, a trade payables account is a liability account. Therefore, the opening balance is on the credit side. Any payments we make to them must be debited because they receive the amount. Any returns will be on the debit side. Any transfers to the receivables will be on the debit side. Again, I repeat, the closing balance is often put in the wrong place. Please remember, for a liability account, the balance below total lines must be on the credit side. Therefore, above total lines, the balance must be on the debit side. So if you put entries in the trade payables account correctly, you will find the missing figure of credit purchases correctly. The next competence that you must develop before you come to an exam is that of handling non-cash transactions. What do we mean by non-cash transactions? These are reallocations of depreciation, profit on disposal, or losses on disposals. These are in fact examples of account transfers. So when you are doing cash flow statements, these are reversed, meaning if they were treated as expenses, then now you must treat them as if they are incomes because you are reversing. Profit on disposal is usually treated as an income. So reversing it means you treat it as an expense. There is one non-cash item that you must know how to handle, and this is revaluation surplus or revaluation deficit. Incidentally, it is not reversed in the statement of profit and loss, but instead it's a useful reversal in the calculation of non-current assets. So we'll talk more in the presentation about non-current assets. For now, I would like to repeat how you get the missing figure for amounts paid for interest, amounts paid for income tax, and amount paid for dividends. Please remember, these are liabilities accounts. So if you know how to get the figure from a liability account, you just replicate the skills. The opening balance is on the credit side, then any payments would arise on the debit side. The closing balance would be on the debit side. Please remember, the figure that you obtain from the statement of profit and loss must be written on the credit side, because in the profit and loss is on the debit side. Therefore, in the income tax account or in the interest account or in the retained earnings account, it must be on the credit side. Then you'll find the correct amount of the interest paid or income tax paid or dividend paid. Now we come to common mistakes that exam candidates make when writing exams. The first one is putting figures on the wrong side of accounts. Please remember, accounting is nothing else except the applying of double entry. So be sure and clear before you come to an exam that you've mastered the rule of double entry. The second mistake is that of handling accruals. Like I earlier mentioned, most figures are wrongly calculated because the time factor in the calculation was wrongly arrived at. Please ensure you know how many months after the end of the year when the payment is excessively made. The next error that students make in the exam is that of writing incorrect journals, meaning the account names are listed there, but they are wrong account names. The amount may be correct. So that goes back to mastering the application of the rule of double entry. Sometimes a student may adjust for an accrual for the second time. For example, you have the cost of sales in the statement of profit and loss, and the closing stock is also in the statement of profit and loss, rather in the trial balance. If you are not sure of what was done, you start adjusting, that is, subtracting closing inventory again from cost of sales. So you must know at what stage accounts have already been prepared and what else you are required to do further. Another mistake that students make is that of including completely wrong entries in a report. For example, if you're doing an updated cash book, you find those entries that should be in the reconciliation, bank reconciliation, they are in the cash book. So before you come to an exam, you must see the difference. Which entries should be in the reconciliations and which entries should be in the updating of the cash book. Usually the clue is those entries the bank have processed, they'll be transported into the cash book. Then those entries we did, deposits and payments of checks, which the bank have not processed, they're the ones we'll use for the bank reconciliation statement. So that's the rationale of doing things. You must be sure of that before you come to face an exam. The other competence that you must develop is how to calculate the value of share capital when shares have been issued. Sometimes students, they don't know how to isolate the nominal value and the share premium. That must be mastered correctly before you come to face an exam. If you're doing the profit and loss of a partnership, please remember the appropriation account is an extension of the statement of profit and loss. So interest on capital is actually subtracted from the profit. Shares of profits are subtracted from the profit. What that means is that you are actually debiting the statement of profit and loss. And so when you take those amounts to the current accounts, it means you are going to report them on the credit side. You don't need to mix up the sides where you put these entries, because in the profit and loss, you debit them like an expenses. So they will be credited to the capital or current accounts of a partner.
Whether you're laying down foundations for your business or restructuring market goals, it's important to have professionals that you can trust. Chartered accountants are key to business growth to help you bring your ventures to the world. That's why you should make sure you have a CA Zambia on board. CA Zambia is a globally recognized chartered accountancy qualification that ensures our chartered accountants uphold international standards and stay informed on the best accounting practices worldwide. Keep your business growth healthy. Go with a CA Zambia certified accountant. CA Zambia, developing business leaders.
The other common mistake that candidates make in the exam is that they try to correct accounting errors in a haphazard manner. You have to be methodical when correcting errors. What do I mean by being methodical? You first have to identify this error, what is it about? Meaning, you must identify the business activity or the transaction involved. And that's the thought process that you must go through. Second, that business activity, are you sure of the correct double entry through which it is processed? When you sort that out in the mind, now you look at the error in the question. When you look at the error, you must identify accounts which have been affected correctly and accounts which have been incorrectly affected. Now, what we see in answer scripts is that a student will start correcting an account that is already correctly affected. And so by correcting it, you are making it wrong. So you must master the double entry and the process of processing figures in the accounting system before you come to the examination. The last point in correction of errors is that you must know what is necessary to put wrong accounts right. I repeat, you correct wrong accounts. You don't correct accounts that have been correctly affected. And that will vary between situation, between error and error. So you must do what is necessary. Is it doubling the amount? Is it writing it on the opposite side? That should be identified on an error-by-error basis. So I have an example of an error to correct. If you, for example, you were processing a purchases returns amount of 125 and it is wrongly taken to a sales returns account. The activity is purchases returns, meaning it must be on the credit side of purchases returns. So if it is taken to the sales returns account, it means you must put those two accounts right. Please remember, this error has not mentioned trade receivables or trade payables. So those accounts which are not mentioned, it means they are correct. They have not been affected by the error. So what is a correction? You put the credit on the sales returns to reverse what was taken there. You put another credit on purchases returns to put what should have gone there. So the total debit now will go to suspense account. It can't go to trade receivables or trade payables. No, because those were correctly affected. So the total of 250 will go to suspense account. But please remember, not all errors are corrected through the suspense account. Some are corrected between two regular accounts, ordinary accounts, not necessarily through the suspense account. The next error that we find common in answer scripts is that of mishandling depreciation and revaluation and disposal of non-current assets. To illustrate this, I'm showing for you the account for buildings. Supposing the question is that you must calculate how much was spent to extend the buildings. So if you have the amounts on the debit side and then you omit a revaluation amount, then the figure which was spent to extend buildings will be overstated from 180 to 300. If you make an error, the same revaluation amount, you put it on the credit side, it means the amount which will come out as spent on extending the building will rise further up to 420. So you can see the importance of putting amounts on the correct side, because the missing figure you are trying to find will turn out to be incorrectly affected. Of course, the account shows which amounts are credited in respect of depreciation. Amounts going to a disposal account are also credited to the asset account. Meaning, when you are preparing a disposal account, those amounts which appeared on the credit side will be debited. Then the transfer from depreciation will be credited. Now remember, when you dispose of an asset, you have sold it, meaning cash came to us. So the amount of cash received is actually debited in the cash account, and so in the disposal account, it must be credited. So when you put the cash amount on the credit side correctly, then you find the missing figure of profit on disposal or loss on disposal. Now we come to mistakes made when answering objective test questions. Examples of objective test questions are multiple choice questions. Now there are two types of objective test questions. The first type is the one which is on theoretical issues. Most students, they look for the correct answer, but I think it's more easier to identify wrong answers, because if you see wrong answers, there will be a word which makes it completely wrong. So if you cross out the wrong answers, you find out that you are remaining with the correct answer. If you are handling a computational question and it's multiple choice question, of those options that are given, there will be only one correct answer. But these other wrong answers, you find that in your calculations, you omit them. So what is the caution that you must take care? Please understand the rationale of logic of calculations. You may do the calculation halfway through the process, and the figure you see, you think it's the answer. Meantime, you haven't completed calculating the answer. Sometimes the question is about an intermediate figure, and when you are calculating the figure, you overshoot. You go and find a figure after the actual answer has been bypassed. So those are what I call half answers. Before you come to an exam, understand the logic of calculations. See the question and determine at what stage you reach the answer to pick, and pick the correct answer after calculation. Now we come to command words. Command words are those examiners use to ask you what to do, the requirement words. If you see the word prepare, it implies that there is a known format of the answer that you must follow, a known process that you must carry out to conform to that format. It means there is a procedure which you should have mastered before you come to the exam. If you see the word list, it means the same as outline. What that word means is you state facts succinctly or accurately without explanations, because listing is just preparing a list. You can even number them if you want. If the question says sure, it means the examiner wants you to demonstrate that you understand the logic of what you are doing. In other words, you have to do some reconciliation, or you have to prove a certain fact. You have to demonstrate analysis and understanding of the issue. So that requires a little bit of explanation. When you see the word explain, it's actually asking you for two things. You have to describe and also give reasons. So most students, they end up at just describing without giving the corresponding reasons for what they are saying. So understand these keywords as are used by the examiners. Now I highlight a very important competence that you must practice before you come to the exam. Please allocate the 3 hours to each questions. If you use 1.5 minutes per mark, you would actually allocate 30 minutes to each question. Now, why is this important? No matter how roughly you can do it, because you want to spend enough time for each question. If you spend more than the required amount of time, you'll find you are running behind schedule. You leave out a question, a whole complete question at the end of the exam. It means your chances of passing are becoming slimmer. So make sure, if you are required to write 5 questions, answer or attempt 5 questions. Then on each question, we'll scoop some marks, rather than leaving 1 or 2 questions because you didn't allocate time to each question. Like I mentioned earlier on, you must master the formats of the answer pages and prepare them. Whilst you are thinking, you are also preparing the answer formats. It helps in saving time in the exam. You are permitted to use abbreviations in the exams, but they must be such that they can be deciphered or interpreted. For example, if you say patch rate, somebody can know that you mean purchases returns. But if you just say PR could stand for public relations. So make sure you use abbreviations correctly such that a reader can understand what you mean. Some questions require that you prepare an answer plan before you start preparing the full answer. The answer plan can be prepared right in the question booklet. Either you label it answer plan or you cross it out when you start writing the full answer. Now, why is this important? Because we have read answers which start with point number 3, then the student goes to point number 1, he goes to point number 4, he comes back to point number 2. That is disorganization. So if you've written an answer plan in key point form, you will know which points to start with, which point will come second, which point will come third, and which point will come last. An organized answer merits more marks than one which is haphazard. Now I'm drawing my presentation toward a conclusion. So as students, please remember there is nothing that can replace adequate preparation. Yes, you've been given exam techniques, but you must start applying those exam techniques right from the start of the semester, right through the 4 or 5 months of study. So when you do adequate preparation, you stand a high chance of passing. Second, please remember, financial accounting is a practical subject. So you can't read it like a novel, no. You have to attempt question, attempt and attempt and attempt, correct errors. By the time you come to the exam, you'll have mastered how to prepare those answers. On the day of the exam, make sure you come to the exam center at least 30 minutes early so that you settle down and cool down. You don't have to come late and start panicking whilst you are in the exam room. Ensure you procure the latest materials or study text and revision kits. The reason is accounting standards are continuously revised. So if you have an old textbook, you'll be mastering things which have changed. So always procure the latest study materials. So in summary, I would like to urge you to work hard right through the semester. Practice these exam techniques and ensure that you master them before you come to the exam. We've come to the conclusion of this presentation. I wish you all the best in your exams and practicing these exam techniques.